Welcome to the Find My Catalyst podcast. We all have problems we're looking to solve. We know that there are solutions out there, but we struggle with this. How do we find that solution? Where does the nudge come from to help us take that next step and start solving tough problems? The intention of this podcast is to help you find your catalyst and take that next step. I'm Mike Simmons. Lee Benson joins me today. Lee is the CEO of ETW and the creator of the MIND methodology. I've recently gone through the certification process for MIND methodology. It's the method that I'll use with senior leadership teams within organizations to help create alignment, improve decision-making and accountability, and ultimately lead to faster and better execution. If you're struggling with alignment and it's impacting execution, let's talk. Let's get to the conversation. Lee, it is awesome to see you. Thank you for joining me on the podcast today. How are you?
I am very well. It's great to be here. Great to see you.
So I have had the fortunate opportunity to recently go through MIND methodology certification, which is a part of a program that you've rolled out inside organizations, and have a book that is forthcoming, which we'll talk about how others can roll out this program inside organizations. Why don't we just start at the top and say, where did the MIND methodology originate?
That is a great question, and it evolved literally over decades. And my first sort of real business was in aerospace, but my first business was actually a rock and roll band back in the 80s, where my band and I played most of those years over 300 nights a year at concerts, clubs, recording. It really was like a business. You had a stage crew, sound crew, light crew, manager, booking the gigs, all of it, pretty cool. But when I started the aerospace business with 3 employees back in late 93, we grew this thing to over 500 employees doing business in 60 countries with about 2,000 customers. And the challenge as I was growing is, how do you get everybody fully aligned to improving what's most important? How do you get everybody making really good decisions to do the right work in the right order at the right time? And how do you constantly build this culture of accountability where everybody does what they said they would do? And that's my observable part of integrity, people doing what they said they would do. And so I experiment with a lot of different things, and probably around 150 employees. I'm working, 80 plus hours a week. I'm loving it. I'm having so much fun. It never felt like work. It's like, I couldn't wait to do it. I woke up at, 3:00 in the morning thinking about this thing. But I did realize there had to be a better way. And my business was stuck at around $7 to $8 million for almost 3 years. And I changed that, and sort of 1.0 version of the MIND methodology. And the MIND methodology stands for most important number and drivers, took shape at that time. And then very quickly, we got unstuck and went from about 9 million to 19 million in 1 year, and then had a steady 20% on average year-over-year compounded growth from there. And it was all about, again, getting the team members fully aligned on the work they could do to improve what's most important. And then the decision piece, all work doesn't create the same return on investment. So are we doing the right work at the right time, at the right order? And is everybody doing what they said they would do? So that was sort of flowing along, and that's where it got its start. And then over time, what are the other elements that can really help keep people focused on creating as much value and accelerating that value creation over time?
How did your experience in a band and playing all of these gigs and coming together, how did that inform your first couple of steps when you started your business in the aerospace industry?
Well, in a lot of ways, it shows you how the world works. We're interacting with different businesses that are contracting with us to play in their clubs. We're working with radio stations to get our music, out on the air. There's lots of agents and managers and all these things going on. It was kind of a crazy world back then. A lot of the clubs, the folks that were doing the bookings, they were into drugs and things like that. So I never really did that. Actually, I never did that. And we even hired people that did to help us get jobs. So it's like, oh my gosh, this is how the world works. This is, how do you survive in this and thrive in this? But it was like a business, and we had a budget. We had all of the equipment. Didn't have a very big budget back then. And I'm super handy. I built all of our speaker cabinets. I built the drum riser. I went to my favorite store back then was Radio Shack. Bought all of the stuff to build from scratch my own light automation board and everything else. And I was totally into it. so disappointing when Radio Shack basically went away, or they changed into like a little cell phone and, battery charger, business. I love the resistors and capacitors and all this stuff. You could build your own circuit boards and all the patch cables. It was like the coolest place on the planet for me to go shopping. So you learn a lot. Like, how do you make something happen when you've got all these moving parts? And here's the value you're trying to create going forward. I think running a business is wildly creative. I think writing music is wildly creative. Working with a band and conveying an emotion that everybody brings forward. It's like, look at any band over time. What made the Eagles so special? It's the way that team, jived together, the emotions that they were able to sort of convey and create, through their music. Change one person out and everything changes. So maybe that's the biggest lesson, during that time. It's how the team works together. I mean, we have to get along. There can't be unhealthy tension. Healthy tension, I think, is really good. And we're trying to create something together, some value together. What's the difference between that and any team and any organization of any size, right?
Yeah. What's the difference between healthy tension and unhealthy tension?
Healthy tension could be a deadline. We're all going for this and hey, you need to get that done by this time. And it's going to totally depend on these other four things over here. And, so we're sort of going for it. Unhealthy tension is, hey, I can't believe I'm working more than you are. And you're, we don't want any of that. We just want to be really clear. Everybody should know, just like in the band, just like in the teams within organizations that I've been involved with, everybody should know what's expected and where they stand 100% of the time if we get it right. That's so easy to say, probably doesn't happen about 90% of the time.
Why do we struggle with expectations and the clarity around expectations, both on both sides, both in communicating them to others and also receiving the communication? There's both sides of this. Why do we struggle with communication around expectations?
Yeah, and that's a really big question. We could probably talk for the next 3 hours about it.
Sure.
I believe, to start with it's how people think about a role within an organization. So we're talking about expectations of an employee that has this particular role. And so the way they think about it, hey, we hired an accountant, and here are 90 different things that you need to be capable of doing. And so come on in here and let's start doing those things. And maybe the most important sort of role-based, responsibility, and I would say a very clear outcome-based, measurable responsibility is, providing accurate financial statements on time. Maybe that's what they really need to do, but they give them a list of all this other stuff. So they're doing all this other stuff. They think they're doing a great job. And yet the information isn't completely accurate, or it's not delivered on time. Maybe another piece is give the right information to each leader so they can make really solid decisions from that information to improve cash flow and profitability, for the organization. But most don't think that way. A simple way to think about this in the MIND methodology and how we run at it, we look at the outcomes that we want to achieve. There's a most important number for the organization that above all others says you're winning or losing the game, and it drives the majority of the right behaviors. And then every single team in the organization will have a most important number that, when improved, will improve the next one up, and it keeps everybody fully aligned. So those are the outcomes we're looking for. And then the second step would be, what's the ideal structure? These are departments, functions, teams, et cetera, to achieve the results that we're looking for. Now, within the structure, you have roles. What would the roles be? It might only be one role in a particular function or department. It might be 20 roles. But for each of those roles, what are the really clear, and it's never more than 1 to 4 outcome-based responsibilities that they need to own? We're making an investment in this employee to sit in this seat, in this role, and we're making the investment so they can deliver on these outcomes. We're going to keep our end of the bargain. We're going to pay them everything we agreed to. We need them to keep their end of the bargain. So we've got the outcomes, we've got the structure, we have the roles with these 1 to 4 outcome-based responsibilities assigned to each role. Now, there's probably a list of 10 to 30 things they need to be capable of doing, but they need to be capable of doing those things in a way that, more, I guess in an increased fashion, achieves those outcomes that their role is requiring. And then from there, we look at the people. And do we have the people that are capable enough to achieve those outcomes sitting in each one of those seats? And most don't think that way. Most start with, these are the people we have. Let's make the best of what we have. And then when we put them in a role, we just say, okay, go figure it out really. And here's 30 things you need to be able to do. But most don't think very clearly around these are the one, two, three, four at most outcome-based responsibilities that you need to own sitting in that seat. So with the best of intentions, I believe 99.9% of organizations and teams and employees are trying to do the right thing. They just don't think this way. So in the MIND methodology, it was really important for us to get that piece of it right. Outcomes, structure, people in that order.
When you think about, so I was saying that most people don't think about it this way. It sounds like as you're talking about the people that most organizations will start on the people side and work the other way. Is that true? Is that what you've seen inside organizations? People starting with the people and then kind of working their way backward rather than from the outcome? Can you go into that a little bit further?
That's how most of them run at it. They start with the people, work their way backwards. They will say many, and you hear this and from a number of gurus out there, hire the right people, get them on the bus and amazing things will happen. Well, technically that's true. However, how have you designed your organization? Do you know where you're going? Do you know the outcomes you want? Do you know how you want those outcomes to improve over time? Have you designed the ideal structure to be able to achieve it? And that's kind of a moving target over time to get that design right. And again, within the structure is going to be roles and responsibilities. And then it's the people side coming up. And when they do hire somebody, they say, here's a job description, must have this much experience, must, in terms of a tenure, doing this thing. They need to be able to, do these 15 or 80 different tasks, whatever it is. Rarely have I ever seen you will own these results, these outcomes. And that's the difference. So we're just talking about, hey, let's design the organization. Let's get the structure right. Let's make sure if we put somebody in a seat, they're actually capable of achieving it. I think one of the least caring things we can do for somebody is set them up to fail. I mean, let's put them in a seat where they've never done that before. And yet maybe they enthusiastically said, yeah, put me in, coach. I'll be great. I'll figure it out. We need to test for that before we do it, because I think one of the bigger common things that happens out there is that leaders will confuse enthusiasm for capability. And they think, oh, they're excited. They must be able to do it. They said they could, and yet they've never done it before. And I see it in marketing positions all the time. There's a number of roles where I'll take that on. I can spell the words and I've heard about that thing. So therefore, I'm sure I'll be really good at it. But obviously, you need to experience a lot to be really good at something and have the wisdom to make the right choices, these correct decisions.
And in early stage organizations, what I've seen there is that you get a lot of generalists inside the organizations who know a little bit about something, and then they get pulled into other segments of the organization. They get distracted, or scope creep starts to happen because they're really good at X, Y, or Z. And ultimately what it does is it creates more confusion inside the organization. It creates frustration at the individual employee level, and that ultimately impacts performance. It contributes to burnout. It contributes to frustration inside organizations. And this pattern kind of repeats as they go about it. And this is one of the things I really like about the MIND methodology, is that what's most important continues to be most important. I don't want to say easy. It's more simple to align around that thing that's most important, which then provides an opportunity for people to look at the decisions that they're making to say, how well does this thing that I'm doing, this decision the work I'm going to take on, the work that I'm completing, the decision I'm going to make, how does it contribute to that is most important?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's a challenge for a lot of teams to figure out, where do we put the resources around a thing that's going to create the most value going forward. And there's a concept that we talk about called the organizational structure bottleneck. And if you look at a typical structure, it could be sales, marketing, finance, operations, customer service, production, whatever those functions are.
Yep.
At any point in time, one of those functions is going to be holding the organization back more than all the others when it comes to creating the value they're trying to create. So when that happens, I think we should be constantly identifying this moving target. And when that happens, everybody should be surrounding it. A common bottleneck could be marketing, generating qualified leads to come in. And if that's the challenge, and we've got our resources spread evenly across all of the departments, and we're waiting for that particular function in marketing to generate more qualified leads. Does that make sense? Or does it make sense that we're going to shift resources and brain power to really solve this problem until that's no longer the organizational structure bottleneck? And then maybe it moves to sales, maybe it moves to production. Now we need to be able to keep up with it. It's a really fun game to play and think about it that way. And it's taken significantly less personally when you look at it like that. So if the team understands there's always going to be one function at any point in time holding back the value creation that we're going for more than all the others, they all agree with it. And when it happens, we're going to put more resources there, then we're going to move it to the next thing. But nobody gets to go backwards in their functions. I mean, they have to keep it all running in the different departments. It's a fun game. We understand it, and everybody creates value a lot faster when they're running at it that way.
Yeah, it's amazing what happens when a group of focused individuals, a team of focused individuals can come together and solve some very interesting, tough problems.
Yeah.
And then that builds upon success. You start to realize, hey, wow, we are a team. We're working on these things. And then they're able to move on to the next problem and move on to the next problem, rather than what I've seen happen inside organizations. And where I've failed inside organizations is when you try to do too much. You try to say, okay, we're going to move this, and ultimately you end up having 5 projects around your house that are 80% complete, rather than completing a project and moving on to the next.
Yeah, and completing the right stuff in the right order at the right time. I love the way my partner Ali Parnian talks about it, like a sports bracket. You know, you're coming up at basketball, pick your sport.
Yep.
If it's single elimination and you don't win this game, you don't go to the next level. And I think it's a powerful way to think about it. A great example here would be a number of startups that we work with where they've got this idea. It's going to be let's say a SaaS-based company, and they need to get the technology and the experience right and all of that. But they raise, not uncommon at all here, they'll raise $10 million or more, and they hire the chief marketing officer, the CFO, and they put all these positions in place. And yet the one thing that they really need to solve for is product market fit. And that could be making sure that your intended audience really sees the value in it, and they're excited and they want to tell other people about it, and it's really going. But what we commonly see is they've loved the expression, they've played house and they've set up all the right, furniture and rolls, pieces and everything.
Yep.
And in their spare time, the CEO might spend a little bit of time on the user interface to get that right, or the focus groups to really, really see what they're thinking of it. And yet it should have been, don't hire any of those other roles until you have product market fit. And we put 90% of our resources there. Once we know we have something and get to some provable, scalable traction, we can use contractors for the other stuff until we add it. So not uncommon to waste millions of dollars of investor money early on. And I think that's the primary reason the majority of them go out of business, because they're playing house with all these other things and not putting 80+% of their resources into that thing right now. If we don't win that, we don't go to the next level, we lose. That's a bad season.
Really, really bad season. And what I've seen happen there and have experienced there is you get the house stuff all set up, and then everybody worries about taking care of their own room, and they want to build their room rather than remember about building the house, which is, hey, here's what we're in business for. We are in business to solve this specific problem. Now, someone on the other end may not care about that problem. So this is where you've got to realize, you've got to be able to connect the dots between the problem you solve and the people who care about the problem that's out there. Some people want to solve problems that nobody cares about, which is fine. You're just not going to make a lot of money. You're not going to be able to build a business. You basically have a train set that you can have inside your house, and you can move things around, and it might feel like a good hobby. The market will validate whether or not the market cares about solving that problem. And if you allow a lack of focus, a lack of being specific about it to distract you, you'll create confusion in the market. And this is one of the biggest pieces of tension that happens inside organizations when you think about what's happening from a sales perspective, what's happening from a marketing perspective, what's happening from a customer success perspective, what's happening from a product perspective, and an engineering perspective. Ultimately, we can do a better job gathering feedback from the market so that we can validate whether or not there's a market to be served so that we can validate whether or not we can serve. And that's where this product market fit that comes together that tends to be elusive for a lot of organizations because they start building out those teams and then they build out these silos inside the organization and they wonder why communication doesn't happen inside the organization. Again, what I like about the MIND methodology is it starts to create that level of clarity and focus around communication, a common vocabulary that's agreed upon from a driver's perspective so that everybody is moving toward the same thing.
I think sometimes what they're trying to solve for, the world doesn't want. But my experience is the vast majority of time, the world wants a better solution for this particular problem, what they want to solve. What I'm getting at here is they fail in the way they solve the problem. And that's because they're not pouring the right amount of resources into solving the problem in a way that people will buy. But most of the time, they're going after something that, there's a need. There's a real need out there. And they're just not doing the right work to make sure they solve it in a way where people really buy it. And then that's an evergreen process too. Once you do figure it out, you never stop increasing the value that you create around that problem you're solving for. The value that our customers, consumers, businesses, et cetera, are looking for.
So let's talk a bit about where you've seen the MIND methodology work really well, and then also talk a bit about where it struggles, where we've not seen success. But let's focus on the success first. Where does the methodology work really well?
Yeah, I'll back up a little bit if it's okay to answer this question, just to give a foundation and support for it. When I was running the largest of the aerospace companies at our peak, we had just over 500 employees. And I did the 1.0 version of this. We had a more of a traditional goal setting cascading process.
Yep.
In this aerospace company, we repaired and overhauled aircraft parts for aircraft operators globally, all commercial operators, rotor wing and fixed wing. And every employee had a quality, cost, safety, delivery, and culture goal that went right to the front line. And they interact with those goals on a regular basis, no less than monthly. And on the culture goals, they would have examples every 6 months of how they applied each behavior or value in a way that made the company more successful. And they even took a shot at an ROI for the application of the culture in this case. How did it improve customer experience internally or externally and or profitability? So we did all of that. And I remember back then, this is a while ago, dozens of my CEO friends through CEO peer advisory group said, hey, we'd love to have access to this. And I said, sure, one of my companies is a software business. You can use the software for free. I'll talk to your senior team. Go ahead and do it. And after a few years, very few were left standing actually doing it. And the ones where it didn't essentially work for them, they didn't say that it didn't work. They said they felt bad that they didn't have the drive and discipline to keep it going. And most leaders really don't. And so I started thinking as I was evolving the MIND methodology, how do I come up with something that will work for 80% of all teams, any type of organization, anywhere, regardless of a superstar leader's in the room or it isn't? When a star's in the room, they make everything work. And my view is it's 3 to 5% at most of the population. What about everybody else? And everybody else will end up making process more important than what is most important. So traditional goal setting and cascading that through an organization, it takes a Herculean effort to keep it going. And I was more than happy to do it. No issues whatsoever. The ratios were something like 20% loved the process, 60% did it because it was their job and they agreed to. And then 20% we had to drag along kicking and screaming. Worked great for me. We beat everybody on the planet for the core products we chose to focus on. It was just incredible what we did. Doesn't work for most. When you look at companies and all the goals that are set, and you start cascading through levels of the organization, the goals, they become less and less and less thoughtful or well designed, I would say. Most don't know how to deal with that. And so a lot of the operating systems out there, there's really popular ones. It could be 40X, could be OKRs, scaling up, EOS. There's a number of popular ones. But with all of those, and I applaud any organization that's intentionally trying to create value faster and using any operating systems. There's literally thousands of operating systems created by consultancies Every company has an operating system, whether it's intentional or isn't. Most of them are actually homegrown. So I applaud all those efforts to really be intentional about accelerating the value that anyone's organization creates, whether it's a for-profit or a nonprofit. Love all of it. But I do talk to folks that are using these operating systems, the CEOs, and they'll say everybody's winning on their goals, whatever you call them, objectives, key results, rocks, whatever it is, but the company isn't going anywhere. So why is that, right? And well, how long have you been doing it? It's not uncommon here. We've been at it for 4 years. We're just getting it at the senior team level. Now we're going to try to take it a couple more levels down. The MIND methodology, we're able to go into a company with 600 plus employees, and within a year, it's cascaded all the way to the front line, and it's actually working. So to get to your question about where does it work, where doesn't it work, where it works best, I would say, is when a senior team really believes that an intentional operating system is required to continually accelerate the value they create over time. And if their most important number is whatever they call profit, net profit, EBITDA, et cetera, or cash flow, we want to see that growing over time on average, not flattening off or going back the other direction. So if they believe an operating system will make that happen, that's a perfect environment for this to work. And that's candidly, the majority of organizations understand that. Now, the challenge for them is which operating system do we pick? And I believe the majority of the popular operating systems and many of the others, if a star isn't in the room, which is most of the time, teams will make process and activity more important than what is most important. So the goal is, hey, we followed the 8 steps of the meeting we were supposed to have. We did these 4 things around strategy that we're supposed to do. Okay, that's done. Instead of in the MIND methodology, or conversely with the MIND methodology, it's always pointing back to every action, every decision is through the lens of what will create the most value today in terms of improving what's most important. And we're even thinking about the best net effect. The timeline changes depending on your organization, but the best net effect 1 to 3 years out. We could get a much better effect today, but the net effect, 2 or 3 years out from that decision may be significantly worse. So we're trying to keep the best medium and long-term value creation, sort of in balance. But activity and process can't be what's most important. It has to be, how will this move the needle? And it's not uncommon to hear a team say, hey, we want to improve. What can we improve? Well, here's a list of 50 things. What would you like to do? Oh, I'd like to do that one. Hey, will you take that one over there? Okay, great. We've all got some time out. Let's assign a value to all these things that we can do. What would be the return from doing each, and how will it affect other parts of the business? Now we're racking and stacking the right stuff to do at the right time in the right order. Now, the second part of your question, where doesn't it work? And with the MIND methodology, transparency, collaboration, communication, wildly important. In a few instances, there have been leaders that just don't like the transparency. If you have a leader, for example, that says, love this, love the results my friends are getting with the MIND methodology, and there's a lot of them out there that are getting extraordinary results, we would like those results too. But I'm just not going to share profit numbers or cash flow and that kind of stuff with the rest of the employees, because if they saw that, they're all going to want more money, and I just don't do that. And I would say, well, we can try it. And in the early days, we did, trying to make something that wasn't the most important thing. But at the end of the day, if you're not going to expose the most important number that says, again, above all others, you're winning or losing the game and drives the majority of the right behaviors, the most important number in driver's system or methodology is just not going to work for you. Like, I'm not even going to try. And so now we know not to go down that road. But in all other cases, it's working. And, the teams are at a certain level of professional development at any point in time. And some teams can go really fast and some teams go a lot slower, but they all go at their pace. And with the MIND methodology, the pace accelerates because of it.
One of the other things I like about the model and the impact of the methodology inside organizations is the ability to create leaders deeper into the organization. So you're extending decision-making throughout the organization because people understand what's most important. They can evaluate decisions. They can not get into this analysis paralysis view of, oh, I've got to go in and make sure that this is what I need to do, and some of the micromanagement components of that. Is that what you're seeing across the organizations that adopt it? Is it's become a vehicle for creating better leaders throughout the organization?
Yeah, that's a question, and I think a great observation. We're constantly improving alignment, decision making, and accountability at all levels within an organization. And not uncommon for a senior team that will start out working with them, and then a year later, you're in the room, same exact team members. You don't even recognize them based on the conversations that they're having. And then the same things are happening as this is cascading out to the front line, whether it's 10 employees, 30 employees, 500, 5,000. I think the largest we have is around 40,000. At every level, the teams start operating like it's a business within a business. They've been charged with creating value. They all have their most important number. They all have drivers they're leveraging to improve it. Just getting better at the work. They're all capturing actions, holding people accountable, lining up the right work to do at the right time in the right order. And that's just naturally what happens. In a way, I would love to see every employee be the CEO of their own role, and they think that way. It's really cool. When teams are accomplishing extraordinary things and they're the ones that did it, that's where real self-esteem comes from. A huge place where it can come from for everybody.
I was fortunate enough early on in my career to have a mentor. His name's Mike McCard. And when he helped me move into my first sales role, account executive role, he had highlighted the importance of understanding that you operate your territory as your own franchise. You're your own business owner, and you need to make decisions on, when I was a little bit younger, my decision-making ability, I believe, has gotten better over time, but you need to make decisions around what resources you're going to apply based on the idea that you own and operate this business. And it's a mindset that you see more and more in sales or revenue roles inside an organization. It is something exciting to see as you start to translate that out into other areas of the organization, because ultimately, just a simplistic view of the world, no matter what role we're in inside an organization, we all have customers. Those customers can be internal or external customers that we're working with. As we work through that, we can be more effective in the way that we engage with those customers, the impact we have on those customers. And prioritization plays a really, really big role in this. And that's where I think getting into this whole alignment and decision-making and accountability becomes just super, super critical inside organizations. Are there, beyond the ones who say, hey, I'm not going to be super transparent about this stuff, are there other organizations where you would say this just isn't the right fit for right now? Meaning there's something that's happening inside the organization where they probably, whatever system it is that they've decided to adopt, they're operating in a way that makes sense for them.
Yeah, they may feel that way. And I've heard that, hey, we want to make sure we've got the right team in place. And essentially what they're saying is we want to make sure everything's perfect before you come in here. Now, with the mind methodology, the more chaotic it is, the more craziness going on, the more leaders on the senior team that just aren't capable of delivering, the better the time to actually put in the mind methodology, because it organizes all of it. Back to being really clear about the outcomes and the structure and the roles and the responsibilities and all that. When all that's laid out, it exposes in a non-personal way, this is what the organization needs to achieve those outcomes. And we're not delivering in these three areas. So what do we do about it? And maybe a couple of the leaders like, oh my gosh, I've seen this a number of times. I really don't like what I'm doing. I don't want to manage people. I don't want to do this, but I really love this. And they all have a superpower at something. Great. Let's change it around to create the most value as an organization. And that's going to be best for all of us, because a lot of the senior leaders have some equity in the companies they work in. But again, the more chaotic it is, getting this organized, the better the time to do something like this. Absolutely. But not uncommon at all for folks to want to be perceived as perfect. So we were not going to bring you in until we're proud of everything. Well, you're not making a sales presentation. We're actually rolling up our sleeves and doing work together to create this machine that just, rockets into the future, and whatever that needs to be.
I mean, there are some organizations who go around and clean their house before the housekeeper comes to clean up or goes out and does
exactly. Yeah. Like everybody clean everything up before the housekeeper gets here. It's like, all right.
Why are we doing this? Yeah. I think anything that we can do to drive and create and reinforce alignment across the organization is good. It is important. And I've seen it too many times inside organizations where we're describing the same thing, but using different words to describe it. And we don't have a common vocabulary. And with this methodology and bringing the team together to build that vocabulary, to agree on drivers. And one of the stages in agreeing on drivers is understanding what a 10 state is inside a specific driver. Would you like to talk a bit about what 10 state means to you and why that's an important thing for an organization to align or agree to?
Yeah, what you're getting at with every team, there's a most important number at the top that represents the entire organization. And the senior team, when they meet, they should be doing work that largely holistically affects the organization to improve that number over time, whatever it is. And so these are categories of work that they would focus on. So if we're at the top of an organization, it could be leadership development. It could be culture. It could be the operating system, like how are we doing things? How do we roll out meetings? It could be practices, like what are the practices in the organization that are important to us and how are they creating value and how can we improve how they create value? So at the top, these categories of work that the senior team should be really good at, those categories are to be leveraged to improve the most important number. Now, how well they leverage those things at any point in time, we rank them from 1 to 10. And it's not uncommon when we start that there's nothing over a 3 or a 4 in all of the drivers that the senior team should be good at leveraging to improve the most important number. And that's actually a really good sign because most of these companies are doing well and look at all the opportunity for improvement. So if leveraging employee development is a driver that holistically affects the entire organization, is a 2 or a 3 at best because it's not that intentional. It's kind of trial by fire. It's a tribal knowledge system, but they want to put in an LMS, learning management system. They want to have all the content there. They want to have mentoring programs. They want to set up really, powerful one-to-one meetings monthly. So every team member is talking about with their manager, talking about obstacles that need to be removed for their performance, their development, their application of culture, et cetera. So here's all these things we could do that we can describe in a 10 state, like a perfect state. If there was nothing we could think of to make it any better to leverage employee development as a driver to improve our most important number, this is what it would look like. Now, if today we think based on that 10 state, we're only a 2 or a 3, what actions from looking at that list, covering what a 10 state looks like, can we take today to start marching forward to move closer to a 10 over time? And it's not uncommon as you ratchet up, you're a 6 or a 7 or an 8. And now you've so intensely studied what it takes to leverage this driver to improve what's most important that you move it back to a 3 again because it opened your minds up to all the other amazing things you could do. This isn't about, again, if it was about process and activity, it would be, oh, look, our driver is a 7 and it's not a 3. No, it's how did leveraging that driver improve our most important number? That's what it's about. It's not about the process, not about the activity going through.
I think that's a really, really important thing that was highlighted throughout the certification process and continues to be reinforced. It's the process never is weighted above the process is never more important than what's most important. And that reminder across the team. The other one that I think is really interesting is over time, depending on where an organization is, their most important number, their min, will evolve and will adapt. And this is where a methodology like this, I think, can really help organizations. It's not a one-time process that's being implemented. It's an evolving mindset, an evolving method, an evolving approach that continues to shift with the organization.
Yeah. Well, every action, every decision through the lens of, will this improve what's most important over all other things that we could do? With our operating system, the mind methodology, we're not teaching anybody a new language. You're not having to learn what a WIG is, what a OKR is, what a ROC is, and all these other things. I understand why operating systems do that to make it a thing, and there's content around it and everything else. With a mind methodology, we use your language. The work that you're supposed to be good at leveraging to improve what's most important, like anything HR, leadership development, culture. What do you call it in your organization? That's what it's called here. So you're not learning a new language going through. I think, Mike, a huge challenge for any leadership team within an organization making a decision on an operating system is that there are thousands of options out there. And every one of them, it also is like religion. Unless you believe our way, it's not going to work, So the challenge is, which one do we believe? So we intellectually understand that an intentional operating system will be really good for us as we go forward. So we understand that now we've got all these options. Which one do we pick? And that's why with the MIND methodology and all of our leadership performance coaches that install the MIND methodology, the first step they go through with a client is a no cost, no obligation, 2-hour experience doing their work with our methodology. And then we come out the other side where everything is organized, the most important number, the drivers, which one should be in focus, running a meeting with the most efficient check-in they've ever done, and the majority of the time spent improving what's most important. Then they decide, does this make sense, yes or no? And I think it's really challenging for leadership teams to read a playbook or read a book or a brochure on an operating methodology. Super challenging for them to know the value it will create for their organization. That's why we do the 2-hour experience. And our leadership performance coaches that are certified, our internal team, myself, I still work with a lot of clients, especially the ones where we've invested money in them. We wear 2 hats. We're leadership performance coaches installing an operating methodology, but we're also an equal member of the senior leadership team with our brain in the room with ideas and kicking things around to accelerate value creation. What companies using the MIND methodology will say, and this is really common across the board, because we always stick with them a minimum of a year in the initial engagement with the senior leadership team, is they'll say what's different about the leadership performance coaches or consultants, if they want to call them that, with ETW or the MIND methodology certified consultants, is they own our results. Most consultants will come in and give advice and leave and get paid. Whereas ETW feels like, the MIND methodology consultants feel like we are, part of the team and passionately owning the results and going for it. In fact, the mission at Execute to Win, or ETW, is improving our clients' most important numbers. That's it. And that's it. It's like show up on time, smile, improve men. That's it. That's what we do.
It is that straightforward, and it is that simple. And the beauty of it is when you get into the detail and you start to realize how perspective starts to shift, how alignment starts to shift. What's one of the things that happens at the end of an experience? So what kind of feedback have you seen at the end of an experience? What kind of consistent feedback do you hear at the end of an experience?
Yeah, when we start an experience, one of the things that we go through initially is just to ask the question, when you meet today as a senior team, because we always start at the top, we don't start in the middle and try to go out from there. We start at the top. When you meet today, and I'll do a lap with everybody, it could be 5 people, could be 12 people. What's 1 or 2 things that go really well when you meet today as a team? I grab that list. And then I go around the group again. Now, what's 1 or 2 things that you think could be improved? And so there's usually a pretty big list, like, hey, it'd be nice if we had an agenda. It'd be nice if we talked about the right level of things. It'd be nice if everybody had a voice. We have 3 or 4 people that dominate. So we go through all of it. And then we get through the meeting, and virtually everything that they said they wanted to improve about the meetings happened, and some at the end. And the feedback will be, this was really good. Everybody did have a voice. We celebrated wins. That's a big part of the check-in. We talked about decision making and how to disseminate information so we could all make better decisions. We're more racked and stacked on the work we can do to improve what's most important than we've ever been before. We had the right level of conversation. Typically, it's really chaotic. And now I feel a lot more calm and relaxed because it's organized and everybody knows what they need to do next. And if we keep this up week after week, it's going to do nothing but get better. Did an experience yesterday with a large coaching company where they train coaches, and they needed to hire somebody internally. And they're just throwing out this giant list of all these things this customer service person is going to do. And I just said, well, it looks like it's these 3 things that you want them to do. The other stuff, these are things that they need to be capable of understanding. Like I talked about earlier, where you're doing these activities to drive improvements in these 3 outcomes that the role needs. And the CEO stopped and said, hey, what you just did there, we don't think that way. We don't know how to do it. And I think that is exactly why we failed so many times hiring for this role and other roles inside the organization. It's like, no problem. That's how we think. And it's just a standard part of the MIND methodology.
There are a lot of people out there who are nodding their head right now saying that's us. But we've taken a job description from a job board and remade it our own. And we've got a number of different components in it. And we ultimately haven't gone through the process of saying, what does this person need to deliver in order to impact the value growth inside the organization? And I think we get distracted trying to do too many things rather than just being really clear and do one thing. And then maybe we can move on to 2 or 3, but let's at least demonstrate the capability to move to 1.
Mike, this really isn't that hard to do.
Right.
You just have to put a little bit of thought into it up front. But when you don't put thought into it, we hire the person, we put them in the role. What do you want me to do? Well, here's your job description. What do you think you should do? Let's go through it. And then how do they learn what to do? By not doing something that everybody thought they should do that they never told them. What a fun environment.
It's brutal. I could do so. And a lot of people know this story. The reason I left the CRO role that I was in last year was because I had gotten myself into a reactive mode. And I was just constantly in this reactive mode where it seemed like I was going from one thing to another thing, but not ever getting the thing completed. Now we've grew the business. We hit the most important number, which the revenue numbers. And so those things were happening. Yet at the same time, I personally felt like I wasn't leading inside the business at the level that I expect out of somebody of my capability. And that's why I'm really excited to be part of this group of certified consultants or certified coaches who are able to deliver the methodology inside organizations and help facilitate those conversations, because ultimately it's about the people in the business who are doing the work. It's not about bringing in some magical person who makes the work just appear. Lee, this conversation has been awesome. As we wrap things up, what is something that person who's listening to this should take away relative to their thinking about the MIND methodology?
First and foremost, I believe the MIND methodology significantly improves any team's thinking around and ability to accelerate value creation. It's evergreen, and there's no end to how they can improve the way and the amount of value that they actually create.
Awesome. Lee, where would you like people to connect with you or see what you're doing or learn more about you?
Yeah, I'd love it. If you're interested in this stuff, connect with me on LinkedIn. We can start a conversation there. If you want to learn more about the MIND methodology, you can go to maxyourmin.com, and min, that's MIN, or you can go to the ETW website, which is etw.com.
If you know of somebody who would gain value out of this conversation, could apply this inside their organization, is thinking about how they can drive and support a better alignment, better decision-making, better accountability inside their organization with an operating system like this, let Lee and I know. Let us know via LinkedIn. Sales is a thinking process. Business is a thinking process. Life is a thinking process. How are you thinking differently about yours?